Right guys, in this lesson I'm going to show you how the three master triad shapes connect and overlay with the cage system. Now I've done the bigger lesson on this, and if you haven't seen that, here's a link to that just up there. But what I wanted to get into was how these triad shapes work. And essentially what we have is three master triad shapes. And if we want to think about it, coming from the E string here, we get a master triad shape that starts on the root. And this one goes up root, third, and then it goes up to the fifth. You could think of this as being a root position triad. Now, when we move up to the next one, we get on the third, and that connects to the fifth, and then we get the root there. Because it's starting on the third, it gives us the first inversion. So really, this is what I think of as being the first inversion master triad. So we've got a root position master triad, we've got the first inversion master triad, and then starting on the fifth, going to the root, and then to the third, we get the second inversion triad. So there are three master patterns that we get on these three shapes here. Now, the funny thing to notice is that there is a pattern that actually just keeps on repeating. And I use the 5R3 a lot because of three of the chords. And the way we look at it is the E, A, and D shape chords. These are what I call the 5R3 shapes. So let me just get my highlighter out and I'll just show you how this works. We've got the A shape here, and this is one of this group of three. And when you play your A shape, you will notice that it does this. It goes across in this little shape here, this 3-note shape. And these are the notes that you hold down to play the A shape. So that correlates with that, and this is why I call it a 5R3, because we're looking at the fifth, the root, and the third in that pattern there. The next shape we come across is the E shape, and if we look here, you can see that what happens is we get an E shape just there, and that just recurs on that E shape there. We're not including any of these other notes here. We're just looking for that little triad there. And as you can see, because this is starting on the fifth, it's a 5R3, which means it's a second inversion, and that is how that works out with that E shape. And it's all based on our caged chords, because if you remember, we have 5 master shapes there. So the 3 master triad shapes, but those overlay and they work with the cage system. This is essentially just an A major chord all the way up the neck, or an A major triad if you want to think about it this way, which is why it says A, G, E, D, C, because we repeat the caged acronym when we get to the end of the D, we go back to C again. So that leaves one shape here that is the D shape, and let's just plot that in here. Now the D shape is probably the easiest shape to see, because for me it just forms a little triangle shape there. And that's the thing about guitar that you've got to remember. It's all about shapes and patterns and how these shapes and patterns work with each other. I should say about shapes and patterns, you see these grayed out bits here. These are nothing to do with this. These are just where the natural notes are on the fretboard, because this all ties in with a lot of other different things here. So this is kind of like a master document, if you will. Now we've got the E, A, and D shape there, and that's taken care of the second inversion there, and it's taken care of 3 of the shapes that we need. Now you may say to yourself, right, okay, well if it's caged, Ricky, there's C, there's A, there's G, there's E, and there's D. What we've done there is we've tackled 3 of the shapes, 3 of the master shapes there, leaving 2. And those 2 shapes are the C and the G shapes. Now the easiest way to look at this is if you imagine that this was the head note here, this would form our G chord. So you can see there we've got the root, the third, the fifth would be behind the head note at the 0 fret if this was the head note here. This would be where we'd put fingers 3 and 4. This would be where we'd put finger 2, and this would be where we'd put finger 1. So let's just plot out this G triad here. And the G triad and the C triad, these guys go in root, third, fifth. It's nice and convenient how all that works out there. There's the root, there's the third, and then that joins into that fifth there. So you can see root, third, fifth. That leaves one more chord that we need to look at, and that is the C shape. So let's look at this C shape triad here. We get the roots, we get to the third, and we get to the fifth there. So essentially this shows you how the cage system and the triads overlap. But there is another thing that I want you to see here, guys, because there are notes that fall outside of this remit, and these are the notes that kind of fall into what I call the intersect. So between different chords, if you look here, the A and the G, The top half of the A chord is the bottom half of the G chord, and that is what I would consider to be an intersect. They share the same position. We get the same thing happening here between the G and the E shape there, so this would be the intersect here. And then when we come up into this E shape, we can see to get this first inversion here, we're starting on this third, then that would be the third from the D shape here. We can see that we get the root, the fifth, the root, and the third for the D shape. If this was the head nut just there, that would be the D shape. And if you were to play a D chord with an F sharp in the bass, down in the first 3 frets in its standard position, then this would just be that repeat of that third, and we'd have a D over F sharp. So the thing to get out of this is that these shapes interlink with each other, and you can see that the triangle of the D shape actually links up into part of the C shape. This is the C shape here, isn't it? And just to show you that, I'll get my marker and I'll put the C shape in there. So there is the C shape. Nice and easy for you to see how that fits in there. And then, of course, once we've got to the C shape, we're going back to the A shape up here. And that would be this blue marker here, because that would be a 5R3 shape. Right, there's something else that I want you to understand as well. The reason I use the E, A and D shapes is because these are the ones that we use to make our 3 minor chord shapes, because if we flatten the third, it's the easiest shape to play. The open C minor chord is a nightmare to play. The open G minor chord is a nightmare to play as well. I'll include the pictures for those in the handout that you can download for free in this video description, just so that you can see how hard the C minor shape is and the G minor shape is. Now, playing it is one thing, but you do need to memorize it, and you do need to work this stuff out by changing it from master. These are the master shapes, and these are all major triads. We have to be able to work this out in all our triad shapes that we can have. But this is the starting point for all of those other workings out on the fretboard. Now, the thing that I wanted to show you was that there is a cycle that happens. And you know me, guys, I love how my cycles work. So 5R3. Now, hopefully you're going to notice how this works going through these 3 master triad shapes. It's going to be super useful for you to understand this. So any point we want to start on a thicker string going across the neck, going from the thick string to the thin strings here. 5R3. 5R3. We're always going around in this cycle. So we're always traveling through these inversions. This is why I think of this as being the root position. This is the first inversion master triad shape, and this is the second inversion master triad shape. But really, we've always got some point here, and this is what's going on. That is just what's cycling through these 3 master triad shapes here that are in the major tonality. Download the PDF for this, and if you haven't seen that video where I go into this and show you it overlaying into the cage system, then watch this video here.